Hey guys, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes 9 today. Just wanted to start by telling you a few news stories, all which happened really even in the last few months. A couple of them you may recognize or know about, but nonetheless, here it is. One article says this: at 11:32 a.m. Pacific time on January 26, a seemingly innocuous winter Sunday, a report from TMZ sent shockwaves to the universe. Breaking: Kobe Bryant has died in a helicopter crash, the tweet read. The report claimed Bryant was one of the 5 people dead in a helicopter crash in Calabasas, California. Experiencing breaking events in real time is a relatively new phenomenon. On that day, it was as if the entire world was following the same Twitter timeline, waiting for more information. Perhaps TMZ was wrong. Maybe there had been a mistake. Surely Bryant, a borderline mythological athlete still very much in the public eye, could not be gone so suddenly. What felt like hours was less than 20 minutes. Local reports came in confirming a helicopter crash. Stomachs tightened. Perhaps in cruel irony, the worst was confirmed by NBA top reporter Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. At 11:51 p.m. Pacific Time, Kobe Bryant was among those dead in a helicopter crash outside Los Angeles, a source confirms to ESPN. Second story. According to an investigation conducted by the California Highway Patrol, the deadly encounter began when 6 teenagers were having a sleepover and one of them dared their friends to conduct a ding-dong ditch prank, ringing a doorbell and quickly driving away at a nearby home. One of the boys rang the doorbell at Chandra's home on Majesco Summit Road and ran back to the waiting Prius while Chandra chased after them. As the Toyota and Chandra's 2019 Infiniti Q50 approached Squaw Mountain Road, authorities say Chandra struck the back of the Prius, causing it to veer off the road and crash into a tree. Jacob Avaski of Riverside died at the scene. Drake Ruiz and Daniel Hawkins, both of Corona, died after being transported to a hospital, according to the Riverside County coroner. And the third story, in 2002, Ochoa walked out of the Dallas bedroom high on crack and shot his 7-year-old and 9-month-old daughter's wife, father-in-law, and 2 sisters-in-law, court records state. The only survivor was one of his wife's sisters, who ran to the neighbor's house after being shot. Police arrested a cooperative Ochea soon afterward. He confessed to shooting his relatives. He told police he couldn't handle the stress anymore, according to the court rulings. 9 months later, a Dallas County jury convicted him and sentenced him to death for the murders of his wife and oldest daughter. At 47, Ochoa had been on death row for nearly 17 years, and on Thursday, February 6, 2020, Abel Ochoa was executed by lethal injection. Now, what do all 3 of these stories have in common? All 3 of these stories have the experience of death. They happen in different ways to different people of different ages, of different statuses, but nonetheless, death was a common experience. And really, death is the common experience of all mankind, of everyone who comes into being, of everyone who is alive. That really the day we're born is the day we begin dying. And so today we're going to be in Ecclesiastes 9, and what Solomon is going to speak to is the reality of death. And so since death is really an inescapable reality of your life, of everyone's life, Solomon's going to explain 4 truths about death that are intended to change the way not only that you understand your life, but even the way you live your life. So again, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes 9, and we're going to start with verses 1 through 3. It reads this: "But all this I laid to heart," says Solomon, "examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know, both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil, and all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts as they live. And after that they go to the dead. So what really Solomon is summarizing here as a truth about death is really that death is inevitable. And I just want to make a few comments on this passage to help you guys understand it a little bit more before we get to application. But he says, all this I lay to heart, saying everything he's been looking at in the past 8 chapters, he examines it all, and this is his conclusion, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Saying the righteous, the wise person, that everything they do is in the hands of God. That ultimately the outcome of it is within God's control. It says, whether it is love or hate, man doesn't know. Both are before him. And so like when we talked about last week and sowing and reaping, that when we tend to make wise and righteous decisions, yes, we have a better chance of reaping consequences that are better. But there's also things that are outside of our control, that they're ultimately in God's hands of what happens. And we don't really know what's going to happen. And so what Solomon is really saying here is, you may be a wise and righteous person, but really you don't know what the outcome of life is going to be. And really a comforting promise that Solomon didn't have, that we have, is Romans 8:28 through 29. Is we know that God causes everything to work together for good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And so what this verse is telling us is not that everything that will happen in your life is good, but rather God will use everything in your life, good or bad, to your benefit, to make you more like Jesus. And so ultimately, Solomon is saying we can't predict the future and we don't know what will happen. But this is something we do know, according to Romans, that God is working out everything for those who love him to be conformed to the image of his son, to be more like Christ. But Solomon moves on. He says it is the same for all, since the same event happened to the righteous and the wicked. What's the event Solomon is talking about? Solomon is talking about death. Death is the event that happens to everyone. It happens to the righteous, it happens to the wicked, the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and who does not sacrifice. In other words, to the religious and the irreligious, to the foreigners and the people who were native to the Jewish religious, the clean and unclean. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And so he swears, he swears is as he who shuns an oath. That somebody who breaks their promise and someone who keeps their promise, doesn't matter, that they all experience death. And so Solomon says in verse 3, this is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. And something you have to understand about the word evil, especially in the Bible and really in the Hebrew language, is evil doesn't always have to mean moral evil, as in something morally wrong happened to you. Evil can oftentimes mean displeasure or a tragedy or a calamity. And I think in verse 3, at least in the beginning, that's what Solomon is saying. He's saying, this is a calamity, a tragedy that is done under the sun, that happens on earth, that everyone dies, that everyone ultimately comes to death. And he says, also the hearts of children of man are full of evil, and the madness in their hearts where they live, and after that they go to the dead. That even while people are alive, I think the second evil he uses here, he is talking about moral evil, that people's hearts are full of sin. And the truth is that we know from Genesis 3, the reason people physically die is that God's law demands that the punishment for sin is death. And God said that from the beginning in Genesis 3 with Adam and Eve in the garden. And so Solomon is ultimately saying that death is inevitable for everyone, and it happens to all. And just think about all the ways that really death can happen to you, even in your daily life. You could be killed by someone intruding into your home. You could slip in the shower, slip in the bathroom, hit your head on the sink, on the tile, whatever it may be. You may collide in an accident on the way to school. You may fall down on a hard surface just walking around or riding a bike or doing whatever. You might suffer a heart attack. You might contract a disease. You might choke on your food. You might drown in the pool or in the ocean. There's so many different ways that you could die every single day. But the truth is, no matter what way you end up dying, you will die one day. And so that is an inevitable reality that Solomon is telling us here. And I think the application for us is simply this: don't procrastinate. Do not procrastinate considering what will happen to you after you die. Don't procrastinate thinking what will happen after you die, because you are going to die one day, and we'll see a little bit later, you have no idea when. And so considering what will happen when you die and after you die is one of the most important questions you can ask yourself. But the good news is Scripture tells us exactly what happens when we die. Hebrews 9:27 says, each person is destined to die once. And what comes after that? And after that comes judgment. Judgment from who? Judgment from God, that you will give an account of your life to God. And so, in light of the fact that death is inevitable and it's going to come, you should consider what type of account are you going to give to God for the life you have lived, the things you have lived for, and what you have believed. This is what it says in Romans 2, verses 4 through 6. Don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? He's saying, don't you see that every moment that you're alive, that God is kind, that God is tolerant, and God is patient, that though you deserve to die for your sin, God is waiting, giving you every opportunity to turn from your sin and to trust in His Son for the forgiveness of your sin on your behalf. But he says, kind, tolerant, patient God is with you. Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that His kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? But because you are stubborn and refuse to turn from your sin, you are storing up terrible punishment for yourself. That on that day of judgment, by refusing to turn from your sin, you're storing up terrible punishment. For a day of anger is coming when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. And He will judge everyone according to what? According to what they have done. That what you have done in your life will be evidence of what you have truly believed, what you have truly valued, and really at your core, what you were living for. Were you really living for God? Were you really living for Christ? Did you really understand and embrace what Christ has done for you? And so that's the simple application here is death is coming. Don't procrastinate thinking about it. It's going to happen. There's no way of stopping it, and it will happen. But we move on to the next section in verses 4 through 6. And this is what it says. Solomon says, but he who is joined with all the living has hope. So he's saying death is bad, death is inevitable, but he who is joined with the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate, their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. And so what Solomon tells us here is really that death is hopeless. Death is hopeless. And I'm going to make a couple comments again on this passage, and you'll kind of see what I mean by that. But he says in verse 4, but he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. And so what Solomon is communicating here is that if you're still alive, there's still hope for change. There's still hope to make a difference. There's still hope to make a decision, to fear God, to love God, and to really to follow Christ. But once you die, that's it. There's no more. The second chance is right now to make those decisions. But he makes this comment, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. And you have to know, dogs back then weren't sort of like pets people kept around that were really nice. Dogs were dirty. They were full of disease. They would bite you. They were wild. They were crazy. They were scavengers. They were not viewed as a nice thing. And he says it's better to be a living dog than a dead lion. A lion is a ferocious animal, a predator, top of the food chain. And so what Solomon is saying here is it's better to have a low status in life or even a difficult life and be alive and still have some hope than it is to be someone who was great or had an easy life and to be dead. Because once you're dead, that's it. There's nothing you can do after that. There's nothing you can do. And so he says in verse 5, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. That eventually everyone will die, and people will forget you. Think even in 500 years from now, or even maybe 150 years from now, who will really remember you? Do you remember who your great-great-grandparents are? Do you know who they are, what they loved, what they hated, what they did, what their lives were? Well, one day you're going to be that great-grandparent, and people will forget you. And he says, so they know nothing, and the memory of them is forgotten. In verse 6, their love and their hate, their envy have already perished. That whatever they were, it's gone and it's forgotten. And forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. That they have no more effect upon the world once they're dead. They can't act anymore in what they're doing. And so think about that for a second. What's the application? The application really here is to use your life to affect how others will spend their eternity. Use your life to affect how others will spend their eternity, because death ends your opportunity to make choices that will affect this world, the people in it, and ultimately their eternal destinies. The people you speak with, you talk with every day are people who will live eternally forever on in either heaven or hell, or ultimately upon the new earth as Jesus brings heaven down when he comes back. But the point is that people really are immortal and that their souls will live on, and eventually everyone will have a new body. And that's the reality of eternity. That's the reality of people you work with, people you laugh with, people you see on the streets, people you help, people you spurn, people you hate. All those people will live eternally. And so think about that. Are you using your life and spending it in a way that will affect people's eternity? Consider this. Death will end every opportunity you have to tell the gospel to an unsaved person. Death will end every opportunity for evangelism. In heaven, there will be no more evangelism. Everyone will be saved there. Death will end every opportunity you have to feed a hungry person. There will be no more hungry people after death. Death will end every opportunity you have to encourage a hopeless person. Everyone's hope will be met once they are in heaven, or their hope will be eternally lost if they are condemned to hell. Death will end every opportunity you have to comfort a sad person. There is no comfort for those in hell, and those in heaven have met the perfect comfort of seeing their Savior, Jesus Christ. Death will end every opportunity you have to help a suffering person. That hell is eternal, and people will suffer there forever and ever, and in heaven there will be no more suffering, no more death. As Revelation says, the former things will have passed away. And death will end every opportunity you have to give to a needy person. And so consider those. It will end every opportunity to tell people the gospel. It will end every opportunity to feed the hungry. It will end every opportunity to encourage a hopeless person. It will end every opportunity to comfort a sad person. It will end every opportunity to help a suffering person. And it will end every opportunity to give to a needy person. That is what will happen when we die. So the question is, how are you spending your life in light of that? How are you spending your life in light of that? Are you using every day that you can to honor God, to serve people, and to love others? Or are you procrastinating that because you think death is so far away that it's not going to happen, that you just have time and time and time to keep waiting, and you'll put it off till tomorrow? You'll start those things later when you have more time, when you're not in high school, when you're not doing so much work, when you don't have so many other fun things to do that you're interested in. Consider this poem. It's by an anonymous author. It's called The Treacherous Tomorrow. And I think it really describes when people don't take to heart what Solomon is saying here, and considering that death is coming, it's inevitable, and that they're alive, and that there really is no more hope of affecting the world or affecting people's eternity after that. This is our one chance. This is what the poem says. It says, he was going to be all a mortal should be tomorrow. No one shall be kinder or braver than he tomorrow. A friend who is troubled and weary he knew would be glad of a light who needed it too. Oh, him he would call and see what to do tomorrow. Each morning he stacked up the letter he would write tomorrow, and the thoughts of the folks he would fill with delight tomorrow. It was too bad indeed that he was busy today. He hadn't had a minute to stop on the way. More time he'd give to the others, he'd say, tomorrow. The greatest of the works of this man would have been tomorrow. The world would have known him had he ever seen tomorrow. But the fact is, he died and he faded from view. Sounds a lot like what Solomon was saying. And all he left here when living was through a mountain of things he intended to do tomorrow. And so what this poem paints is a picture of someone who kept putting off tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. That's when I'll live a life that really matters, to focus on things that have truly eternal value. But the sad thing is that he comes to the end of his life and it's gone. It's gone. His influence, his chances to influence the world or the people around him are completely gone, and he has wasted his life procrastinating what he always thought he had time to do tomorrow. And so don't wait till tomorrow to start living the way that God wants you to be living, as it's laid out in God's word. Don't wait till tomorrow to do these things and to act in your life. And so we go on to the third section, verses 7 through 9, and it says this: Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. So I think what Solomon is getting at here as well, if death is inevitable, it's going to happen. If death is hopeless after you die, then it's probably a good idea that you enjoy some life while you're here. Enjoy some life while you're here. And so he says, go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not your oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Notice Solomon says that he has given you understand that God under the sun, God ultimately determines how long you live. Verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. And so a few comments here is, the first one's pretty obvious in verse 7 of Solomon telling people really that they ought to enjoy their food. They ought to enjoy their meals. Verse 8, he says, let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. And really wearing garments of pure white in a day where there wasn't laundry, there wasn't cleaning services to do that thing. You couldn't just take it to the dry cleaning. Wearing something that was spotless white was really a luxury of something that, a luxurious possession you enjoyed. And the same thing, this idea with oil, that most people weren't exactly bathing back then or showering. And so what people do is they would anoint themselves with good smelling oils of sweet fragrance to make themselves smell good. And also it was sort of a luxurious possession. And if you were somebody who even had a bald head and you were constantly living in the desert, or you were in Israel, the sun was constantly beating down upon your head. And so oftentimes people would put some oil on there, like some aloe vera, to keep their head from being so burnt and to alleviate some of the pain. And so I think what Solomon is saying in verse 8 is really to enjoy your possessions. And in verse 9, he says, enjoy the life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life. And so he's saying, enjoy your marriage. Enjoy your wife. Enjoy your husband. Enjoy every aspect of your relationship. Emotionally, the companionship, the fun, the sexual part of it. Enjoy your relationship that God has given you. And he says, God has already approved what you do, meaning God approves of marriage. He approves of us enjoying the good things that he has given us. He certainly approves of us enjoying the food that he has given us. And lastly, really to enjoy our work in verse 10. So he says, so whatever you do, do with all your might, because when you're dead, there will be no longer an opportunity to work as you have on this earth and to affect the people and the things in it. And when you think about it, your food, your possessions, your marriage, your work, these are probably 4 of the most common experiences that everyone has in life. Those are 4 things that likely, except for marriage right now and maybe work, but you can even technically be working if you're not being paid for it, meaning you guys work at school, you work when you're doing chores, you're working to accomplish things, get done. But the point is, these 4 things are things people experience on a daily basis. And I think what Solomon is saying is, enjoy the mundane, the everyday things of life, knowing death is coming. Don't take them for granted. Don't take for granted the food that you eat and that you enjoy. Don't take for granted your possessions. You know, some people think Christians shouldn't have any nice things, and Solomon is saying here, and I think God is saying, it's okay to have some nice things and to enjoy them. That God loves when we do that. He doesn't want our possessions to take hold of our hearts and control us, but he certainly wants us to enjoy some nice things. Enjoy your marriage. The person that most of you are going to marry someday, you're going to wake up every day side by side. Enjoy being with that person and enjoy your work. Don't hate your life every day dragging yourself to work. Work hard. Enjoy what you're doing. It reminds me of this verse, 1 Timothy 4:4-5 says this, since everything God created is good, we should not reject any of it, but receive it with thanks, for we know it is made acceptable by the word of God in prayer. And so Paul says to Timothy that we should accept all these good things from God, receiving them with thanks from God. And the simple application there is, are you accepting the mundane, the everyday things from God that you have? Are you accepting them with joy and really savoring them and enjoying them? But we go on to the last part of the message for today, and that's verses 11 and 12. And it says this, again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift. When he says the race, he's talking about the race of life. He says the race is not the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those who have knowledge, but the time and chance and happen to them all. So he's saying there's no guarantees in life. You don't know for sure what's going to happen. And just because you're fast doesn't mean you win the race. Just because you're strong doesn't mean you win the battle. Just because you're wise doesn't mean you always get paid. Just because you're smart doesn't always mean you make a lot of money. Just because you know a lot doesn't mean people will like you. And that's what Solomon's saying. He says in the last part, but time and chance happen to them all. That life can be rather random at times. But then he says this in verse 12, for man does not know his time. Man doesn't know his time for what? Man doesn't know his time for death. Nobody knows the time and the place and even the method of their death. He says, like fish are taken in an evil net. You see that word evil again, probably meaning calamity, a tragedy. And like birds who are caught in a snare is like a trap. So the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. And so he's saying death comes to us all, and sometimes, and most of the time, even at the most unexpected moment. That it's like a fish in a river who suddenly gets snatched up with a net. Like it's a bird who's just going on its way, eating from a tree, and then it gets caught in a trap. That's what death is like for us, that we're just eating, we're hanging out, we're living life, we're doing our thing, and suddenly, bam, death comes. And that was the case of the stories we read earlier with Kobe Bryant, with those few kids from Riverside who were Christian students from a denomination, from the same denomination as us in a church in Riverside. Youth group kids just like you guys, just living their life, hanging out with someone's birthday and having some fun. But death came. And so what Solomon is telling us here is that death, just like life, is unpredictable. It's unpredictable is what death is. And so the application is here is maintain the perspective on your life that death could happen at any moment. Think about that for a minute. Think if you really lived your life thinking death could happen at any moment. What are the sort of things that you would do that you're afraid to do? What are the sort of things you're not doing that you would do? What are some of the things you are doing that you would stop, that you realize are a waste of time? To be honest, myself, I often think of laying on my deathbed and looking back at my life. And when I'm making decisions now, I think to myself, what am I going to look back while in the moments that I'm dying and say, I'm glad I spent my life doing this. That's how I want to live my life. I want to live my life looking back and not having regrets of how I spent it. Reminds me of Jonathan Edwards. He was a famous theologian in American history. Maybe some of you guys read him in school. He wrote a famous sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. But the point is, when he was a teenager, he wrote these resolutions. I believe it was some 50 some of them. And basically, he wrote these resolutions. He read them monthly and at the end of every year. And his resolutions were basically, I want to keep these things the rest of my life. These are things that I am resolved, that I am determined to do the rest of my life. And one of his resolutions was this: resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do, as if it were the last hour of my life. Resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do, if it were the last hour of my life. That is a great resolution. Think if you applied that to your own life. What are the things that you would do that perhaps you're afraid to do, or that you're too stubborn to do? I think it captures Jonathan Edwards' resolution, what Solomon is alluding to here. Maybe for some of you, it would be mending a broken relationship that you have with someone, that you would want to make up with someone before death comes. Maybe it's telling someone the gospel that you never have, someone you really care about, someone you really love, and for whatever reason, whether you're scared or just haven't made the time or aren't sure how to go about it, you haven't told them the gospel and pleaded with them to repent of their sins. Maybe for some of you, it's just expressing appreciation and love for someone who influenced your life. Do you do that on a regular basis? That if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, what types of things would you say to your parents and your friends and your pastors and leaders at church, your teachers? What things would you want to say to them if death was coming? For other, you might be spending time with someone you haven't made time for, investing in a relationship that you keep saying, yeah, I'll do that later, I'll do that tomorrow. And lastly, maybe for some of you, it's just even pursuing a hobby, something that you're passionate about, that you've been doing all the things, doing a lot of things in life, that need to get done, but you haven't been making much time for what you're passionate about, what you really want to do. And so consider that. What would you do if you knew you were going to die tomorrow? What would you say to people? So that's kind of how we have it there. Those are the 4 truths about death. Death is inevitable, Solomon teaches us. Death is ultimately hopeless because we can't change anything after that. Death is informative because it informs the way that we should live now. And death is really unpredictable, that we don't know it's going to happen. And so I would just end with going back to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. We read this in verse 2. Solomon said, "It's better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart." 100% of you will die someday. The only question is, have you taken it to heart? Have you considered the implications of what your death will mean for your life and how you are spending it? Death is coming. How will you spend your life?